Today I want to talk about a somewhat new to me fan service series from Japan called OneeChanbara. I've mentioned some of the games in the past, but I've never really dove into them to see what they're all about until now. It's actually right up my alley, and I can't believe I slept on the series for so long. But let's talk about some background information from the series, then I'm going to go through the games to show you what they're like. OneeChanbara is a series published by D3 Publishing featuring fast-paced, hack-and-slash type gameplay, with fan service being a very prominent attribute. The games have female leads, and since this is a hack-and-slash series, we need hordes of enemies which come courtesy of a zombie invasion. This is a very 2000s enemy from a 2000s era game. Only one game deviates from the formula, which is a shooter spin-off called Schoolgirl Zombie Hunter, but we'll get on that later. The name OneeChanbara makes sense because One-chan means older sister, which is a theme in the series, and Chanbara is apparently the Japanese term for sword fighting. If you combine those two, you get OneeChanbara. The story of OneeChanbara is strange, let's say. It feels like you're always missing something right from the first game. It's like you're playing an old arcade game where you put a coin in and it kind of vomits out the synopsis while the game is loading the level. That's kind of the style of delivery anyway. The basics are that you fight the undead. Okay, that's simple enough. The main character of the series is Aya, who dresses in this interesting cowboy slash bikini getup. She's got baneful blood running through her veins, which is like a cursed bloodline thing. And when she gets covered in more and more blood, she'll go into berserker mode and she gets stronger. She also has a sister named Saki, and she's also part of the baneful clan, or whatever they call themselves collectively. There's also a vampiric clan that later pops out with two equivalent characters that you'll see in later games. I don't really know what the hell's going on. That's the very basics of the plot, but it doesn't matter too much. The games are fun, and I guess you just kind of figure out what's going on here and there by just following the cutscenes and stuff. The thing I noticed with OneeChanbara games is that they're actually quite refined given the context. Like, they're not super high budget games. The battle systems and gameplay mechanics are all well thought out for the most part. There's different abilities, attacks, and different enemies require specific techniques in order to deal with them. Plus, different characters have different fighting styles and weapons. Slashing at enemies is satisfying, the sounds are good, and the music is good too. And the games even look pretty good and run well. What I find amazing is that Tamsoft actually developed these games, and a lot of you will remember that name. I think it's interesting that a lot of rough edges and shortcomings in their Senran Kagura games, Neptunia spin-offs, and other stuff like Valkyrie Drive, those things are just not as prevalent in the OneeChanbara games. I'm guessing it's because they're working with a different publisher and that just changes the outcome. When I did graphic design, a lot of the stuff I had to pump out quickly and cheaply was pretty bad compared to projects that took longer and had bigger budgets, so, that sort of thing. There's been several releases since 2004, the original Japanese release of the first game. Not all of them have been brought to the West either, and the naming convention hasn't been consistent in the West either. The first two games were part of D3 Publishers' Simple 2000 series of games, which were games made to a budget. Simple 2000 series, Volume 61, The OneeChanbara, was the name of the first game. That rolls right off the tongue and down the stairs. Volume 90, The OneeChanbara 2, was the second. So yeah, by the volume number, you can tell there were a lot of little games they made. These games didn't make it to the North American market, but they did release the first game in European regions as Zombie Zone. The first two games were then also remade or remastered, whatever it is, a few years later as Zombie Hunter 1 and 2, but still only for Japan and Europe. All those were PS2 games, by the way, in case you're wondering. Then there's a few games that didn't make it out of Japan. So what I'm going to do in this video is go through the games in chronological order in terms of the story, and it'll only be Western released games, so no Japanese exclusives. I spent a few hours with each game to get a feel of how they play, and then I could see how they compare to each other. And also, just so you know, I always played the newest version, if there's been remakes or updates or whatever. You'll notice that the games have many similarities, which I'll go over now. The basic gameplay is obvious. That's very similar across the board, though every game does feel different. You can also switch between multiple characters, kind of like a, tag team style. Often you'll also get a choice of two weapons which you can switch on the fly for each character. There's a meter that allows you to do special attacks when they fill up, though that's quite dependent on the game in terms of how that's all handled. When your blade gets covered in too much blood, you have to clean it off, because it makes the blade less and less effective. so you have to shed the blood off every now and then. Thankfully that's a quick animation, but you can still get ambushed while doing that. Depending on the game, cleaning your blade may get rid of all or just some of the blood. Speaking of blood, getting covered in more and more blood will eventually lead to your character going into berserk mode. You become much stronger, but your health goes down over time. Every game seems to handle that differently. Sometimes you have to hurry up and finish the mission before you die, while in other games you don't really get that much of a harsh penalty for going into that mode. The games all seem to have a story mode divided into chapters, which can be played in various difficulty settings. Other modes exist too, like survival, and some games may even have multiplayer modes. There's options to dress characters in different outfits. Stuff like that is what you'll see across all the games, with variations here and there, but that's what to expect across the series anyways. Let's take a look at the games individually now. OneeChanbara Origin is up first, which is available on PC and PS4. It's a remake of the first two games in the series, and ironically, the newest in terms of release date. It therefore handles pretty well and is quite refined. The game has a cel-shaded look, which isn't the case with any of the other games. It's an interesting choice. You're seeing the PS4 version running on the PS5 at 60 FPS. Inherently, there isn't much to complain about. It's really fun. When you stagger opponents, you can press two buttons at the same time, X and square, which allows you to mow through enemies. In fact, if you aim properly, you can wipe out almost everything in the area, as the attack keeps going as long as there's enemies in your path. I thought that was interesting. Doesn't really make the game that much easier though. I guess you could just go through fights a bit faster that way. There's still enough of a challenge though, plus you can change the difficulty setting. Something I noticed straight away is that in certain finishing move-like events, you can see some slight pixelation where you slash the zombie. I thought that was a bit odd. I hope you can see that when I zoom in. I kind of find it strange that the game is censored in that way. I tried to look up online if people were talking about it, but it doesn't seem the case. I see some talks about the game being toned down in terms of jiggle physics, and also the camera mode or picture mode or whatever it's called doesn't, allow for low camera angles and stuff. But yeah, there seems to be some mucking about when it comes to that sort of thing. The game still has a decent amount of fan service though. The way the story is presented isn't exactly amazing. I kind of already talked about that before, where I said it's like an arcade game or a fighting game where, you get story snippets fed to you just before the level loads. But I guess you could say that it has a bit of a charm. What doesn't have charm is the strange localization job. Every fan of the Index and Railgun series will cringe hearing how One-sama was changed to Sissy in the translation. Ugh, that's awful. That happened here too in one of the early boss fights. I cannot stand that. You use a lot of face muscles to cringe, but here I'm running out of muscles and body parts to cringe with. The hideousness of that specific translation is unspeakable, but the rest is fine I suppose. I didn't really notice anything too weird. If there's anything else that's strange, it's certainly been overshadowed by that. And just so you know, you can change the voiceovers to Japanese. I just had them set there to English because that's how the game came with the default, I guess. OneeChanbara Bikini Samurai Squad for the Xbox 360 is up next. Now we're going back in time for the next game in line. For some reason the series took a detour from the PlayStation 2 to the Xbox, and actually the Nintendo Wii as well, as you'll soon see. This 360 game is the first North American release of the series, which is why it's also spelled with only one E. There weren't that many E's back then. You'd think that going back more than 10 years would be a bit troublesome or somehow annoying, but honestly it's not that bad. The game still looks good, it runs smoothly, though this is on an Xbox Series X, just so you know. The graphics are pretty good looking. I just said that actually. But yeah, you can also see here that they went for a more realistic art style compared to with the Origin remake. There are gameplay differences. Going into Berserk mode really makes your health go down fast, so it's something you have to monitor a bit more. Another thing to note is that combat is a bit less varied. Maybe I just don't know how, but I feel like there's less combo choices. The levels are also different. The zones you fight in seem to be a bit smaller and more cramped, but at the same time they can be a bit more interesting because of that. They look kind of realistic. The only really unfortunate thing is the camera. It's slow to maneuver, but the worst part is that it gets hung up on the environment. It's as if it was a physical object that's floating around and hitting the walls. So here's an example. If you're in a hallway, let's say, you can't turn around the camera at all. You'll have to run into the unknown until you reach like a corner or something so you can turn the camera around. Or you have to just run into enemies blindly, because once there's enemies you can lock onto them and then that flips the camera around. But then if there's no enemies and you hit the lock-on button, nothing happens. It's really bothersome, actually. And then there's times where there's levels, you know, that are not as restrictive. You don't really notice that too much, though the camera can still be slow to turn around. But yeah, use the lock-on button if possible. OneeChanbara Bikini Zombie Slayers for the Nintendo Wii is the sequel to the 360 game that almost has the exact same name. In North America and Europe, they came out on the same day, which is confusing. Given the name and also the release date, you'd be excused thinking they were the same game just for different consoles, just like a port or something, but that's not the case. Now, I actually had some technical difficulties, so I couldn't play this game, which is really unfortunate. I wanted to try this out because it's a Wii game, to see just if there's any weird quirks about it with the, you know, the Wiimote and stuff. It does look like the 360 game, but instead of being, you know, 720p or whatever, it's in standard definition. It seems to run smoothly from the gameplay footage I've seen online. Maybe someone in the comments can let me know how this game is and if it's really similar to the 360 game like I'm assuming it is. Now we go to OneeChanbara Z2 Chaos for the PS4 and PC from 2014, 15, or 16 depending on the country and system. This is the PS4 version running on the PS5. Other than having the best disc art I've ever seen, it's also the first time the Western release skipped a game, not counting spin-offs and mobile stuff anyway. The preceding game, OneeChanbara Z Kagura, was released only in Japan. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. I think this game plays the best out of all the ones so far. Early on, you get a lot of characters to control, which I think really helps. It's fun that you can choose between 4 characters, and because they all have their own fighting styles and weapons that you can switch around, that's just kind of, yeah, that variety helps. I think this is the most refined experience of the series. In my button mashing hands, it feels like pressing different button combos is also much more likely to deliver different types of attacks, which is good. There's some levels that don't look particularly amazing. I mean, the jump between the 360 to the PS4, you know, it's a bit samey. But I think a lot of like budget games like that have that problem. I mean, look at other stuff like Neptunia or maybe the Atelier series or something like that. There isn't that much difference between the generations there, but whatever. And now we come to the spin-off, which is Schoolgirl Zombie Hunter for the PS4 and PC. And once again, this is the PS4 game running on the PS5. And yeah, I'll admit it, I really like this spin-off, and I played it for longer than any of the other games. The gameplay is similar in concept to the OneeChanbara games because it takes place in the same universe. A school gets attacked by zombies and you control 5 students trying to survive. Instead of swords and other close-quarter weapons, you use guns primarily, but melee weapons are existent and they are relegated to when the action gets too close to you, so you can kind of like, you know, knock them all out of your personal space, I suppose. You'll notice the zombies are, you know, you'll see them from the other games as well, so like the cops with the guns that shoot at you and stuff like that. While each character supposedly specializes in a gun type, you can equip whatever you want, and there doesn't really seem to be a penalty as far as I can tell. This is true with their secondary weapon as well. There's handguns, assault rifles, submachine guns, sniper rifles, and shotguns. Though I've also seen a rocket launcher, though for me that's really easy to blow myself up with, so I don't really use that. You'll find a ton of guns and weapons, and for some reason they drop from zombies like crazy. Like where did they get these guns from? There's a lot of variations of certain models that specialize in things like reload speed, fire rate, damage output, and there's even auto aim. Now, auto aim isn't amazing because it's always aiming towards the middle of an enemy, so yeah, that basically makes headshots almost impossible to pull off, other than by accident if like another zombie gets in the way. Now, aiming isn't super amazing with a controller. You know, it's not like a sophisticated, balanced way of aiming like a AAA shooter would be. It's a bit like Galgun, where it's, you know, you kind of go back and forth and then you miss a couple of times before you hit. I imagine that with a mouse this would be a lot easier, but still, I think it's fun to play. There's various types of missions, like gathering certain items, going from A to B, or just surviving for a certain period of time. And I also like that when you know, the game progresses, that the game becomes more difficult by having different types of zombies being introduced that you have to deal with in different ways. The entire school complex is modeled, and it looks like a very accurate recreation of a Japanese high school. There's at least one mission where you have to collect stuff that gives you ample time and a low amount of slow enemies. and no borders. And that allows you to explore the entire premise. So that's fun to just look around there. The location really looks great, and you can tell there's a lot of effort put into it. More so than the other OneeChanbara games where some things just look flat. Here, everything, like all the classrooms and all, everything is just really detailed. The dark atmosphere and post-apocalyptic surroundings are very well made, and I think one of the highlights is also the lighting. It's great how different they look from different light sources. Like there's different light bulbs and stuff here and there from signs. And also there's the flashlight that your characters have, and then when they're running around, I think that looks pretty good. There's a decent amount of fan service, including outfits and underwear that you can customize. There's one specifically that is like, whoa, they really, that is really interesting from the back end there. Overall, I really enjoyed this spin-off. I know it gets criticized because it's so different from the other OneeChanbara games, but yeah, I thought it was pretty good. And yeah, those are all the OneeChanbara games in chronological story order. I don't know, maybe not the spin-off, I don't know where it lies in the story, but I don't think it really matters. Sorry again about the lack of the Wii game, but there you have it. A fan service filled hack and slash series. Who knows if you'll see more of this series in the future, but at least there's a catalog of games to look into if you've never played this before. Of course, with my overall limited playtime, there's certain things I missed, like what happens in later games, or sorry, what happens later in the games, for example. I didn't try the original Zombie Zone / Zombie Hunter games either, so of course comments on differences with those games are very much appreciated. Maybe there's actually a good reason to play the PS2 games rather than the Origin remake. So there's that. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.